All right, so today we're going to learn about Sarah Imenu, or more accurately, go ahead, you're passing. And the Torah is eternal. So when we learn about Sarah, and we learn about Hebron, we're also going to answer the question whether or not we need a woman in the White House. Hang on to your seat. Second reading, Parshas Chaye Sarah, chapter 23, verse 17. So Avraham Avinu came to Hebron, and he made an enormous statement about the importance of Sarah Imenu. He's ready to spend any money in the world. He spends the equivalent, maybe it's $4 million, I don't know, a crazy amount of money on a tiny piece of property. A very prominent and important piece of property. But as the Rebbe once told Rabbi Elberg, who asked the Rebbe, what was the eulogy? Maybe the eulogy was Shnei Chaye Sarah, the life. So the Rebbe said, he didn't have to say anything. He did. He spent all that money. That was the biggest eulogy possible. Was what he did rather than what he said. At any rate, there is a medrash that says that he said that he cited Eshes Chayil. I don't know why that wasn't in the conversation. But Akolpanim, clearly the Rebbe believed that the most important eulogy of all was what Avraham Avinu did for his wife Sarah. And after the negotiations are completed, and after Avraham Avinu gives the money to Ephraim, the Torah says, verse 17, Vayakom Sedei Ephraim. The field of Ephraim was raised. Asher b'Machpelah, the one that was in the Machpelah area, Asher lefnei Mamre, which is before the Mamre, Hasada v'Hama'ara, the cave, but it wasn't just the cave. Avraham Avinu brought the entire field, Asher Bay. V'chol ha'etz Asher b'Sada, all the trees were included in the sale. Asher b'chol gvulei, in its entirety, the whole area, Saviv, everywhere around, all of that was bought by Avraham Avinu. Now Rashi is obviously bothered by the word Vayokom. What does that mean, Vayokom? Vayokom literally means to get up. How can a field get up? So Rashi says this has to be understood euphemistically. Why would the Torah employ a euphemism or a poetic word here? Just say he bought the field. The field became his. So Rashi says the Torah is trying to tell us something. Tukuma haisaloi. The field was raised. Its profile was raised. Sheyotza miyad hedyet. It had gone out of the hand of a commoner, liad melech, to the hands of a royal. And when it goes into the hands of a royal, the previous ownership is no longer relevant, meaningful, or important. Chapter 24, verse 17. So that's why it says Vayakom Hasada. That's why it says the field was elevated. V'hame'ara asher bay, in the cave in it, v'chol ha'etz, and all of the trees that were in that area, all of that was elevated. V'havraham l'mikna. As the Rebbe once explained elsewhere, clearly Avraham Avinu did not just buy a plot, but he bought a very important parcel of land. And this was like buying a piece of downtown, or maybe just a small area, but a very, very valuable small area. And when he bought this small area, he established a very prominent Jewish presence in one of the most powerful cities in the land of Canaan at the time, which is Hebron. So that's why it says Tekuma Haisalai. Now, when a regular person buys a home, so people still remember, oh, so-and-so lived there before. You know, you have these historical homes, the McDonald home, or this home, or that home. It has a history. Who lives in it now, I don't know, but it has a history. Why? Because a famous person once lived there, or somebody had it before. But if the king or queen buys it, then it no longer gets called the house of so-and-so. Now it becomes the royal home. And once it becomes the royal home, the old ownership simply dissolves, dissipates. It's no longer has bearing on the property. And that basically is what Rashi is saying here with the idea of Tekuma Isolai, that the field is elevated. I should tell you that the Medrash Agada says that the field literally rose about a half an amma. Half an amma is like about 3/4 of a foot. The field actually rose. And it's interesting, when you go to Maras Machpelah, you go upstairs. It actually is elevated from all the area around it. But anyway, that's what the Medrash says. You could take it or leave it. Rashi does not introduce that idea in Pshuta Shal Mikra. There are many Medrashim Rashi does find a need for it in the literal, most straightforward interpretation. This Medrash is not invoked, but rather here means euphemistically the field is totally elevated. It becomes Avraham Avinu's. Okay. What happens then? Verse 19, and after all of this, V'kovar Avram es Sarah ishtay. Then Avram buried Sarah, his wife, el ma'oras ha'machpelah, el ma'oras de ha'machpelah, the cave of the field of Machpelah, al pnei Mamre, before Mamre. So we really have a whole repetition, this verse, with coordinates given once again, a verse later. He Hebron, this is land of Hebron, the Eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. This is a very challenging verse. I apologize, I skipped verse 18. Verse 18, let's go back for a second. Avram lemikna, for Avram was mikna le'eni b'nei ches, before the eyes of b'nei ches, b'chol boi sharirei, for all the people who came into the city gates. Incidentally, the city gates, that's where people would gather. That was like the big, important, prominent area. Big business was conducted in the city gates. And if it interests you, a couple of years ago, the archaeologists are pretty sure they found the city gates. Very close to Ma'aser Machpelah. Very close. Maybe 500 yards away. Maybe 700 yards. Very close. And they actually found the steps going down, and they're like 95% sure that this is the city, the gates to the ancient city of Hebron, and that's where this would have taken place. So the sale was finished, and Avraham Avinu went forward and he buried his wife. And that's what here in Vilchol Ba Yishayir, Rashi says, Bekerev Kulam, this was not a secret backroom deal, but rather it was in a very public manner. The Maimid Kulam Miknola, he gave it to him in the presence of everybody. Everybody was gathered there. This was a major public event. It was covered by all the big newscasters. It was on Facebook Live and whatever the other iteration of our time that you could think of going back to that time. The bottom line, the equivalent of all these things, that's how this was done. This became a big event that was widely known. Verse 19, which we just read earlier, Sarah, only then, does Avram go and bury Sarah in Ma'aser Machpelah? We get the coordinates all over again. The obvious question is, what is the purpose of saying the Acharechein cover es Sarah ishtay? What are we trying to say over here? So the Tiferes Tzvi says in the name of the Medrash that Avraham Avinu actually involved himself in the burial on a personal level. He himself buried Sarah, which is unusual, especially a very famous person. You have people who do it. You have undertakers. Avraham did not allow anybody else. Avraham himself buried Sarah Imenu. So further to what the Rebbe said about the idea of paying top dollar, Avraham Avinu further demonstrated his love and his loyalty to Sarah Imenu by burying her herself. Now Hamik Davar says something interesting. He says something which was brought elsewhere actually, that it's a cherpa for a tzaddik to be buried in a caver which is not theirs. And there's actually a discussion, the Mefarshim talk about this when Yaakov Avinu said that he bought a caver. There's this idea of having a caver, buying a caver. And there's the discussion that you're not supposed to do that, and it seems to be a distinction between in Eretz Yisrael and outside Eretz Yisrael. Outside Eretz Yisrael you shouldn't do it, in Eretz Yisrael you should do it. Certainly the question of digging the caver, it seems that Yaakov says a shakarisi. Yaakov even dug his own grave before, and that's certainly outside of Eretz Yisrael is not appropriate, but they maintain inside Eretz Yisrael a person could do that. At any rate, the point is, Avraham Avinu didn't bury Sarah, even though Sarah's there. I mean, it's like covered hames. Should bury her right away, as soon as he agreed. No, Avraham Avinu waited not only until after the negotiations were completed, until the transaction was finished, it was ratified, that everybody was there. Only then was Avraham Avinu prepared to bury Sarah Imenu. And another thing we could also note is that this was an issue of getting everybody else's permission, so to speak. This was a municipal issue. As we go on and read after verse 20, Vayakom Hasada, re-emphasis again. The Torah emphasizes everything here twice. The field rose, the cave in it, to Avram. It didn't just rise to his possession, but rather lachuzas cover. Everybody knows you don't rent the grave. The grave is a permanent thing. And this was me'ez b'nei ches, from the hands of Ches. Avraham Avinu totally removed it from their possession. So why does the Torah have to emphasize Vayakom Hasada? The Bechor Shor says, only after Sarah Imenu was buried was the transaction completed, this place formally dedicated, because until then it was a transaction, it was an agreement, but once the burial takes place, that's permanent. That's it. Sarah Imenu is in repose. That's the way it's going to be forever. And the Ur HaChaim says very interestingly that we have a discussion of business laws and transactions from a Torah perspective, that when a Jew is buying from a non-Jew, so kesef itself, just the exchange of money in and of itself, is not sufficient to affect the sale. But there also has to be something called a maise kinyan, or more importantly, chazaka. kesef and chazaka. We have to have an exchange of money, and we have to have the assumption of ownership. So assumption of ownership would only be here when Avram actually used the field for what it was used. So when you buy a field for farmland, if you plow the field, that's assumption of ownership. If the field is fenced in, you strengthen the fence, broaden the fence, that would be an act of ownership. Here, since it was being bought specifically for the purpose of a grave, when does it become an act of ownership? When did you use the field? When you used it for what you bought it for. So that's what the Torah has to say, Vayokom asada v'amara asher bai. Because the real tekuma, the real rising of the field, only happens afterwards. And it happened me'es b'nei ches, but it wasn't from b'nei ches, it was from Ephraim. Avram brought it from one person. This field was in one person's possession. Why would the Torah say that he bought it from b'nei ches? It actually makes no sense. It sounds incongruous. It's not factual. Avram buys it from one man, and he say he bought it from a whole people, a whole tribe. So the Medrash Seichel Tov says something very important. He says that firstly, this was a legal transaction, and there was an actual documentation. And for documentation, you need a court system, you need to have a magistrate, you need to have witnesses, you need to have a scribe. It wasn't just Avram involved, there was many people involved in this transaction, number one. Number two, based on this medrash, we could say that when you change the use of property, certainly in today's day and age, you need to get it ratified by the government. City council has to ratify it. The zoning, it's a zoning issue, right? So there was like a zoning issue. This was center city Hebron, downtown Hebron, teeming with life. And all of a sudden, Avram moves in to Rockefeller Park, whatever you want to call it. There's trees over there, and there's a big area and a famous cave. And according to the way Deb explains it, there was a big skyscraper, a tall building over there. Bayis v'ali al gabav. Because otherwise, it's describing a cave. Every cave has caves, one cave in another. Think Torah Bora. Everybody, endless caves upon one upon the other. But the Bayis v'ali al gabav, there was like a big home over there. There's a big building over there. And Torah emphasized the whole field. They need a whole field for one caver. Caver is 6 feet. You need 5 acres for one caver. Avram Avinu bought this whole area. And he bought this whole area, and he decreed it. This was from now on, this was dedicated, consecrated, changed. The zoning was changed, becomes a cemetery. This is the world's oldest Jewish cemetery. The burial place of our patriarchs and our matriarchs. That's what happens on that day, and that's why it's me'ez b'nei ches. Everybody had to be in agreement. The entire local municipal council, or what have you, had to ratify it, and then, and only then, does the land fully transfer. And so we have the first parcel of land that becomes Jewish in Eretz Yisrael. All right, let's go on to some commentary. And we're going to answer my opening question. Do we need a woman in the White House? Let's see. Let's see what the Torah has to say. Page Reish Samach Gimel. The Rebbe's commentary here begins Siman Tez Zayin, Reish Samach Gimel, in Parshas Chaye Sarah. Eretz Yisrael, he begins with a commentary on the land of Israel. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, Huvtecha la'Avraham Zman Rav Lifnei Misas Sarah. This land was promised to Avraham Avinu a significant amount of time prior to the passing of Sarah Imenu. In fact, decades earlier. Va'Avraham af hishalech ba'aretz la'arka u'lerachba. We learn that decades earlier, in fact, more than 50 years, half a century earlier, it's a long time. Avraham Avinu gets the promise, and Avraham Avinu, after getting the promise, which is after Lot leaves him, he goes for a sojourn of the land. He walks the land, he travels the land, la'arko la'rachba, in its length and breadth. And the obvious question that we had at the time was, why does the Torah have to tell us that? First of all, why does Avraham have to go around it? Was he can't find his place? Can't live in one place? Why was he have to be a nomad for? Why do you have to go all over the place? Find yourself a place and settle down. And Avraham Avinu, in fact, did settle down. He lived in one place for 25 years, one place for 26 years. So what do you mean he went all around? Most of the time he was actually settled. So the answer, the Gemara in Bava Kama tells us, and Rashi quotes this, is he did this kedei liknoisa, in order to acquire it. We talked about the idea of acquisition, that you have to not only exchange consideration, but also there has to be an act of acquisition. One of the acts of acquisition, which legally affects the sale, is walking. You know, when I sell the chametz to the Gentile, so not only we have an exchange of cash, not only I give him the equivalent of a blank check for all the rest of it, or he gives me, equivalent for a blank check for everything, for the entire amount of money. Not only this, but when I sell him the chametz, I designate one of the rooms that's being sold, and that room, I give him the keys to it, and I tell him walk back and forth to establish your possession over this. So usually I sell the chametz in my office. I sell Feigi's office. Because my office I sometimes go to. I don't sell that whole office. I don't go in there. I give him the keys to the office. And he walks back and forth and locks the door. So this idea of walking back and forth, that affects the sale. So the sale of chametz is a full sale. In order for this to be a full acquisition, if you will, going back now to the story with Avram Avinu, the Gemara in Bava Kama says Avram walked all over the land. After being promised by Hashem, Avram is walking there, being there, that established his possession of the land. So we're talking about possession that's been established some 50 years earlier, more than 50 years earlier. When we call Makkah. This was not something that was widely known. It was not widely acclaimed. It wasn't widely recognized. Avram Avinu knew this was like a private thing between him and Hashem. He knew that this land was owned by him. Nobody else knew about it. It was very meaningful. It was very holy. It was very spiritual. It was very special on some level. But on a practical level, it wasn't known in the city. It wasn't something that other people knew about. Not only it wasn't known about, but at that time, Haknani af his chazek. The Canaanites arrived in this land at the same time as Avram Avinu did. The truth is they have no more rights to it, but ancestrally, this land belonged to Shem, the son of Noach, as they divided the Mesopotamian basin up in three. The whole Eurasia was divided in three, and Shem had a certain portion, and Chum had a portion, and Yefes had a portion, and this is part of the Semite land of Shem. And Avram Avinu was a very prominent descendant of Shem. That's where the term anti-Semitism comes from, which is kind of funny because a lot of other Semites too, but we became known as the Semites. We represent Shem in the world's eyes. So these are Canaanites who are Chumites, not Semites. The Chumites came from North Africa and they conquered Eretz Yisrael. At the same time, Avram Avinu arrives from Iraq in Eretz Yisrael because Iraq was also in the land of Shem. But Eretz Yisrael and Iraq are really very close to one another, the real Eretz Yisrael, but much, much bigger than the sliv we have today. So Avram Avinu moves in, and he's a Semite, and this land is promised to Shem. It's his family's land, but the Chumites come at the same time, and they come in large numbers, and they come with a tremendous amount of military prowess, and under duress, the locals leave. We don't hear about a war, but under duress they leave. The Canaanite establishes his position there in a very, very strong way. 7 Canaanite tribes settle there, and they make this their land. As it says, that's a direct quote from Rashi, that he was going, they were conquering. Slowly but surely, they ousted the family of Shem from the land. The only one who was left was Shem himself. And his Dam Digur is Malki Tzedek, and he lives in a city which is called Shalem, which you better know as Yerushalayim. But other than that little village called Yerushalayim, or Shalem, and Malki Tzedek, and a few of his people, nobody else remained. All the other people who remained, they were not Semites anymore. So 1 second. Avram Avinu comes to the land of Canaan at the same time as the Chumites. The Chumites get stronger, and Avram Avinu has some mystical, spiritual, perhaps even legally meaningful transfer of land, but in the practical, real world, right here on earth, in everyday life, nobody heard about Avram Avinu, at least not as the owner of the land. He may own the land before God's eyes, but practically speaking, the Chumites are here. The Canaanites are establishing their presence. When does a portion of Eretz Yisrael legally, formally, publicly, actually become Jewish land? Here. Sarah Iman was buried. Dafka l'tzeirach Sarah was for the need of Sarah. Lichvoida, for her honor. Hechela lehismamish ba'alusah shel Avram Avinu ala aretz. That we begin to see an establishment, a practical unfolding of that theoretical ownership. Kishakana, when the field is purchased, it's the Efrat Asher Machpelah, Hamakim Harishain, the very first place, Shavram Rochash, Bepoil Ubegale, Avram Avinu purchased, actually, not theoretically, actually purchased it, ubegoli and openly, le'eni kol ha'amim in a manner widespread and public, v'nepach ha'makim shel hedyet le'eretz Yisrael. At that point, it becomes formally transferred, and then there's a transformation. The transfer of land affects the transformation of mundane, ordinary piece of land into sacred soil, the land of Eretz Yisrael. This is when it happens. Sarah Yemena was the cause. The Rebbe says, Hasiba Lakach, the reason that it's Sarah Yemenu and the needs of Sarah that bring about this change, this is kshura, this is directly linked, one of the general distinctions between ish leisha, between the male and female dimensions. Ha'ish, the man, metiva by his nature, meruchak menihulam hamasi shel yonei habayis. He is not directly involved in the kind of home that he lives in. Who sets the stage for home base? Who makes it the kind of home it should be? Dafka ha'isha hi ha'isekes behem. The woman is the one who nests. The woman is the one who creates the atmosphere, the environment, the kind of home that they live in. This is it is the woman who actualizes the theory. The husband could theoretically want to live in a warm home, an open home, a cold home, an indifferent home, whatever it's going to be. But practically speaking, whatever his wife decides, that's the kind of home it's going to be. Like the words of our sages. And the Torah, my dear friends, remember, is timeless. Not something which changes with the vicissitudes of times and societal shifts in attitude or perspective, but the Torah's ideas are eternal. And if the Gemara says this, then the Gemara says it even if we don't have men going out to the field and nobody's grinding wheat or even baking bread by themselves. This becomes euphemistic of life itself. This is a paradigm. Ha'ish mevi chitim. The husband, the man goes out to the field, he brings home wheat. If you try to eat wheat, not Wheaties, wheat, can't eat wheat. It's not edible. Who makes the wheat bread? Who makes it edible? Everybody does their role. So this is a quote from the Gemara in Yevamos. What happens is his eyes are illuminated. He's established as a mensch, as a person. So in other words, who sets the tone? Practically, Ha'isha. According to this, we could also explain a fascinating statement which is made in the Tanat Ve'Eliyahu, which is the collection of teachings from Eliyahu Hanavi. That it says, Eliyahu taught, Ezeu Isha Ksheira. The word kosher does not mean holy. It does not mean blessed. What does it mean? What does kosher mean?
Touched.
No. Correct. Suitable. Appropriate. Prepared. Mukhshar is a person who is talented, capable, able. It's about capability, ability, something which is ready for something. So if something is prepared for a particular use, you say it's mukhshar. It's now prepared. It's kosher. Kosher means suitable, ready. It's appropriate. So what's an appropriate wife? What's an appropriate woman? That literally translates, or perhaps mistranslates as, she does the bidding of her husband. The Rebbe explains that's not what it means. Ha'isha hiya hamevia es etzayin baila l'de'asiyah b'poil. Oiser etzayin baila means she makes that will. He has will. He has many desires. Sure, and it remains in the heavens. He has the theoretical desire. I want this. I want that. Okay. He wants to stay till tomorrow. What happens? What she decides to happen. That's what happens. That's the idea of the ideal partnership. He could have the ideas. He could have the vision, but he has to have a wife who's going to translate that into action. Who's going to bring it down in a realistic way. That means oisa, making the Ritzoyim Baila, from the theoretical to the concrete. Hadavar nochen gam beruchnis. This is also true on a spiritual level. Ha'ish mitivei meruchak v'nivdil man yonei elam. If men would actually follow their inner calling in nature, they would be a little bit aloof. They would be a little bit removed from the comings and goings on a practical level. It's dafka ha'isha hiya mikasheres b'peilos ha'lakus emela magashmi. In the spiritual mission of the Jewish people, it's specifically the woman who's tasked with the mandate of bringing godliness down to earth. It's not the woman her main task is to actualize Judaism. Judaism remains theoretical. Without Jewish woman, it's a theoretical Judaism. With Jewish woman, it's an applied Judaism. So Zeotam, this is the reason Avram Kishal Atzmei Lehigshim is Baluse. No surprises here. Avram Avinu got the mandate. What did he do about it? Basically nothing. Sarah nudged him. She tried to get him to act. He couldn't even get him to kick Ishmael out. Even barely. Hashem had to intervene. Avram had to follow through and do what Sarah said. But Badafka b'schus Sarah, now Sarah is no longer here. Avram has no choice. Now, under the, so to speak, the force of Sarah's presence and the Sarah's needs, this becomes actualized. Not the theoretical ownership of Eretz Yisrael, but the actual establishment of a Jewish presence, a legal presence, a public presence, a concrete presence, that the actual land is Vayakom, the land is elevated and raised, sheyatzam liad hedyet liad melech. Incidentally, in the light of all this, another question is answered. Why is the parsha called Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah, when Sarah Imenu is she's only discussed in the postmortem? Her death is mentioned, her burial is mentioned, and her replacement is talked about. Rivka, the next matriarch. You could not find a greater oxymoron to call a parsha that discusses the death, burial, and replacement of Sarah Imenu. You couldn't find a better name than Chaye Sarah? And the answer is that tzaddikim are even more alive after their terrestrial lifetime. And when did Sarah Imenu's vision, and when did Sarah Imenu's spirit and practical application of all these ideas finally get unfolded? When did it finally happen? When was it concretized? In the passing of Sarah. That's Chaye Sarah. That's the life of Sarah. So making this a little bit timely, do we need a woman in the White House? The answer is absolutely yes. Does she have to be a president? Not necessarily, but there's got to be a woman. Whether she's the first lady or the president, there's got to be a female influence in the White House. I heard that Melania is staying home in the White House in New York. I don't think that's a good thing. I think that the president's going to need to have a woman to tie him down to reality instead of flying out there. And the influence of the first ladies over the years, I'm just using this as a frame and example, has been at times enormous, and sometimes we don't know about it. And some of the best presidents were good presidents, largely due to the influence and the inspiration of their wives. I think like Nancy Reagan, that's me as a kid, that's what I grew up with. She was an enormous influence in the White House. So do we need a woman in the White House? In the Torah, it says most definitely. For the house to be a proper house, for it to become a home, you need to have a female influence. The Eibush is a helping that all those people who have missions and mandates to do great things should do great things, and that Yidden should only have Besudas Tevis. And the most important thing of all is that Mashiach should finally come. And talking about Mashiach and talking about Jewish monarchy, you should know the Gemara says, Melech v'lei mater nisa lav malkuhu. A king without a queen is not a king. The idea of the female influence is enormous. It's enormous. The Rebbe did not allow shluchim to go out single. All the shluchim were only sent out married couples. The Rebbe didn't send a man, he sent a couple. Because it's only when you have both influences that you're able to have the mission accomplished.
So did Abraham have to buy the rest of the land too?
Did he have to buy the rest of the land? He wanted to buy the rest of the land. Did he have to? I don't know. He bought much more than he had to. That's the point. That's the point. This is how Eretz Yisrael was established. It wasn't just a grave. It was a whole ancestral land that was bought. It was an estate, Machpelah estate.
Right, but what about the rest of the country that he walked across?
So the rest of the country he walked across. Moshe Rabbeinu passes on and hands it over to Yoshua, and we arrive in Eretz Yisrael. And we take it by force. But a piece of it was actually accomplished. Chaim.